Right, I'm Daniel from OS Training, and I am with Margaret for semantic versioning. So I will leave you in a very capable hands. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions section, and we'll try and answer them as we go along, or at the end. It's completely up to Margaret. Okay, over to you, Margaret.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at, I guess. Thank you for celebrating the one-year anniversary of Drupal 8 with us today. I hope you've had a chance to attend some of the awesome sessions presented throughout the day. If not, videos are going to be posted to the site, so you'll be able to catch up on all this great information. We still have people joining us, but here you are. This session is semantic versioning, or how Drupal 8 keeps getting better. We've only got an hour, so this is what we're going to try to cover today. First, now that I've got your attention, I'll introduce myself, and then to make sure we're all on the same page, I'll give you a fast history of website development and how we've gotten where we are today with Drupal 8. Don't worry, it's just a couple of slides, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Then we'll get into the key concepts behind semantic versioning and how the Drupal project team has applied it to Drupal 8. We'll get into specifics by reviewing the Drupal 8 release schedule. And finally, I'll review some of the cool features we're seeing introduced to Drupal 8 through these minor version releases. Specifically, we'll try and look at some of the great new experimental features that were released in 8.2 last month. And then we'll wrap up with some time for questions. So my name is Margaret Plett. I've been in business technology marketing and training for 25 years, and I built my first website back in 1996. Back then, I was leading North American marketing for my company, but I had to build the site against the recommendations of my boss. He actually said, "You'll have to do this on your own time. People will never use the internet for business-to-business purchases." Of course, they do, and the site build became an important marketing milestone for the company. Things have changed a lot, though. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of website development in a second. Just also to tell you about myself, I got my master's degree in MIS in 2000, started my own web development practice. After teaching college computer classes and building client sites in Joomla, WordPress, SharePoint, and Drupal, I settled on Drupal and decided to teach full-time. So since 2012, I've been an Acquia training partner. And earlier this year, I took the lead on writing their Drupal 8 curricula. In July, I moved to my training practice from a technical training company to ProMetSource. They're a Drupal development firm headquartered in Chicago since 2003. I've had the pleasure of working with Andy at ProMetSource over the last 8 years or so, and so we were really excited to bring my practice in under his umbrella. So now we offer end-to-end Drupal services and open source application building. So if you're interested in learning more about online and in-person hands-on Drupal training, mentoring, and workshops, you can check out our Drupal training practice site at drupaltraining.prometsource.com. All right, so let's jump in with a brief history of how we've gotten where we are today with Drupal 8. So the way I learned to build websites back in the mid-90s was much different than where we are today. Actually, back then, HTML2 had just introduced image tags, and CSS was still in its infancy. Our websites were mainly text and images, and it was assumed that mostly people would enter your site through the front page or the index. We would literally have welcome to our site messages there as though it was our front door. Site maintenance consisted of updating text files, and as websites became more complex, we saw our static sites grow to contain thousands of those text files. Around 2000, a few things changed the way we handled website data. First, PHP matured with the inclusion of ZendEngine, providing web developers with a template language, and the first database-driven website platforms became available. We found we could separate data, display, and business logic. And with that web technology, non-technical staff were empowered to manage their website content. Also in the early 2000s, web developers started to realize the benefits of sharing code. So when Dries Bijtaert and his friends created a database-driven message board while at University of Antwerp, he decided to release the code behind the software. In sharing the code and encouraging others to improve on it, he kicked off an online community and the creation of a platform that has evolved into what we see as Drupal today. So Drupal is an open source website development platform. It simplifies the online management of content and users and is the backbone behind more than 1 million websites around the world. When you work with a Drupal website, whether it's 6, 7, or 8, you can expect to work with a modular content management framework that allows you to create very customized websites tailored to your organizational needs. So at the top level, you can say that Drupal enables site administrators to use the framework to customize data access with a built-in user access control system and granular permissions, data control with the ability to build comprehensive structured data collection forms, data display to assure the website displays dynamic, relevant content where you need it, as well as customizing the look and feel of your site to match your brand requirements. And still talking in general terms about Drupal, I want to just quickly address what we mean by open source. So unlike proprietary or closed source software like Microsoft Office or Adobe's Design Suite, open source software is free for anyone to use. And it makes the source code available for anyone to use and modify. Source code is the code that programmers use to manipulate how an application works. So as a result of being an open source platform, Drupal's source code is available to anyone interested in modifying or developing their platform further. Programmers from all over the world donate their time to help improve Drupal, and Drupal provides a code of conduct, coding standards for programmers to follow, and all improvements and changes go through a solid community vetting process to ensure integrity and stability of the application. It's really exciting to see so many people collaborating and participating in a community that embraces transparency and change. And Drupal's open source community is one of the biggest reasons why the platform continues to gain momentum. As we jump in, there's just a tiny bit of terminology that I want to make sure you're aware of. When Drupal speak, core is a word that we use. It's a term you'll hear a lot. It just refers to the files and modules included with Drupal 8 out of the box, or in other words, what's immediately available for use with every instance of the Drupal platform. Since every site can be configured uniquely with contributed and custom functionality, we differentiate the tools available with these 3 classes. Core, referring to what comes with the platform out of the box. Contributed refers to add-on functionality that's contributed by the open source community and freely available at Drupal.org. And custom refers to the functionality that's written specifically for your organization by your development team. So Drupal's grown in leaps and bounds over the last decade, powering everything from small blogs to some very influential sites. Look at some of the websites that are powered by Drupal. Of course, there's technology groups like opensource.com and Red Hat, but entertainers, internationally recognized cultural venues, universities, major news outlets, state, local, and federal government, multinational corporations, major sports leagues, and even whitehouse.gov and weather.com are built with Drupal. The growth is due in part to Drupal's unique strengths that keep getting better. So while many of you may be familiar with Drupal 6 or 7, Drupal 8 is set to be the most powerful and widely utilized platform yet. For more examples, I wanted to mention that just yesterday, Dries posted a list of some of the exciting sites that have been built in Drupal 8 over the last year. I encourage you to take a look. Dries has his blog at bijtaert.net, and the specific blog from yesterday is bijtaert.net/Drupal 8 turns 1. Some of the websites that he featured there that are built in Drupal 8 and really fantastic displays of what Drupal 8 can do are NBA.com, NASDAQ, Al Jazeera, Jack Daniels, Jurassic World. There's a whole bunch for you to take a look at. So now you've learned a little about the history of Drupal. let's talk about semantic versioning specifically and how it's making the Drupal 8 project the best yet. So to explain what makes semantic versioning so great for Drupal 8, let's talk a second about Drupal 7. 7 was released in 2011 and grew to be an extremely stable development with lots of contributed functionality. You can see here on this side, I just took this screenshot today, there are over 12,000 contributed modules available for free on Drupal.org to add features and functionality to Drupal 7. This is very cool, but during the 5 years that we worked with Drupal 7, it became evident that there were some contributed modules we could not live without. Nearly every installation I've worked on included views, chaos tools, date, calendar, CK editor, jQuery update, module filter. That's just naming a few. So this doesn't mean that Drupal 7 was lacking at release. It means that over time, our needs changed and development capabilities improved. Things really move quickly in website development, as you know, and so 5 years is a long time. The only problem with Drupal 7 per se is the inability to add new features to core throughout its development life. So Drupal 8 has solved that issue with semantic versioning. Semantic versioning simply refers to the process of assigning unique version numbers to each state of a software development project. For this system to work, you need to declare a public API like Drupal does, and then communicate how changes are handled with specific increments to the version number. So that clear communication is key, and Drupal 8 has done a solid job of providing detailed documentation. The numbers are generally organized in 3 parts. The first number of the version referring to major API changes, like from 7 to 8. The second for minor feature releases compatible with the API. And the third number incrementing patches and bug fixes compatible with the minor release. You can read more about semver at semver.org. And if you're interested in the Drupal 8 documentation for contributing to core, you can find that at drupal.org/contribute/core. So here's how we've adopted semantic versioning and the numeric incrementing for the Drupal 8 project. The documentation specifies that when numbering releases, the first number represents core, and moving from one core, like 7, to another, like 8, would include backward incompatible API changes. That means updating directly from 7 to 8 would break your implementation of Drupal. The second number represents changes that are backwards compatible with the core API, such as new functionality and features. This is the thing that is so exciting for the Drupal 8 projects. We're no longer tied to the features locked in at major releases. Instead, we can continually test and add new features through minor releases. The third number represents changes like bug fixes and patches that are compatible with the minor version release. So with that information in mind, we can look to Drupal 8 release schedule and have a clear idea of when new features and functionality will be released. Let's take a look at that. These key dates and the full schedule are available on Drupal.org. You can see the URL up there at the top, drupal.org/core/release-cycle-overview. The key information is here, though. There's a schedule, and most exciting to me, the team has been able to stick with this schedule. We've seen the releases occur on the dates as planned throughout the last year. So on November 19th of 2015, exactly 1 year ago, Drupal 8.0.0 was released. And then in April, we had the release of 8.1.0. So that was the final security release of our first minor version change. So that these minor releases introduced new features and functionality And we've had 2 of them within the first year of Drupal 8. The second just happened last month, and we'll get a peek at what's coming in 8.3 beta, which you can see in blue there, will come in January, with the actual final release of 8.3.0 in April of next year. If you're involved in contributing to core or want to help, you'll need to dig into the documentation online, and it's all going to be at the root drupal.org/core. Here's information from the backport policy that just explains how patches will be committed to the development minor branch first, and that assures that there's no regressions from minor release to minor release. If you want to read specifically about that, you can find that at drupal.org/core/backport-policy. All right. So good. We're moving really quickly through the material. If you guys do have questions, please feel free to post them up about what I've explained so far. We're going to look at what features have been released so far with these minor releases, how they've introduced great new functionality to Drupal 8, and then I'll do some demoing to show you how you can play with those features and test them out and see how they're working and incorporate them in your new build. When you're looking at this information and when you're thinking about what's coming next with Drupal 8, you'll find a lot of blogs and demos available. Just Google new features for a specific minor release of Drupal 8. So are there any questions now before we jump into some of the features that we have? Any questions about Drupal 8 in general or semantic versioning? If you have any questions, you can type them in with the questions box in the GoToWebinar interface. Okay. So what we saw, the first minor release that we've seen of Drupal 8, was 8.1, and that release introduced some new experimental core features. And that's the way that the team has been rolling out new features when they want to introduce it to core through a minor release. They're adding them as experimental so that they can be tested and vetted thoroughly before they're included in core. So what I'm going to do is pull up a site. I'm also going to show you a development environment that you can use on your local machine so that you can spin up Drupal 8 sites all day long and have your own sandbox to test out the features that we're seeing in Drupal 8. So 8.1 introduced BigPipe. BigPipe is a third-party tool that gives us the ability to get really fast page loads, delivering personalized content, so queried content more quickly. Normally, dynamic and like personalized content is slow loading, but this BigPipe tool immediately sends like the page skeleton to the browser so that it can start rendering, and we see a very quick load on it. I have an example, I think, from Steve's OS training site. So this just shows the page load differences when BigPipe is installed as opposed to just using Drupal 8 on its own. And it's just a couple of seconds, so we'll let it go. And they're referring to how this content loads. Watch this with the cold cache. It's amazingly fast, 0.25 seconds versus 6.3 seconds. Now with a warm cache, again, 0.25 seconds versus 3.25. Super super quick load times are what we're seeing, really high-performing rendering in your browser with BigPipe, which was introduced as an experimental tool. In addition to that, Drupal 8 introduced some new migrate features that have been used to migrate content from Drupal 6 and from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. This has been something difficult with the major API changes. So it's exciting to have migration tools built into 8.1, and they are continually working on them, so we'll find those in the core experimental list of tools, which we'll look at in a second. The other thing in 8.1 that was introduced was inline forms. This is like showing errors when you're filling out a form. So you go in, you type some text in a number field or in a phone number field, and giving that immediate inline form error. It was not something that we've done well in Drupal, so they introduced that in 8.1 as well. They also are continually improving with each of these version releases, but I think those are really our three strong additions that we saw back in April of this year. Then last month, we had 8.2 released, and we saw some really cool of these outside-in functionalities added to Drupal 8.2. This outside-in concept is that we should be able to work right on the page, that it can be much friendlier to make changes to your site as a site administrator or content editor. And we've always, we've had those contextual links on the site. Let me pull a site over. So we've had these contextual links, which means these little pen marks in Drupal 7 and certainly in Drupal 8 that allow us to get to the editing interface directly from the page, but we're still going into a separate interface. And so in 8.2, they're showing some of the tools that are now going to help us get this interface to a much friendlier state and make it easier for new people to Drupal to use the site building and editing tools. So we're going to look at turning that on as well so we can see what it does. In addition, 8.2 introduced content moderation tools, which are very exciting. That's if you have content workflows where you want to have publishing separate from content editions. So someone puts in content, but it's not published until it's edited, and maybe it even goes through legal review. So we can iterate the publishing process with that tool. And place blocks is the other new key feature that I'd like to show you guys today. So we have a site up. I spin up sites all the time using a tool called the Dev Desktop. It's available for free from Acquia. Acquia has a bunch of free distributions and tools available. I get to them at acquia.com/downloads. And the Dev Desktop gives you an AMP environment locally. So that's an Apache server, MySQL database, and PHP library with a control panel. This is what the control panel looks like. And as you add sites or code bases, they're listed on the left side. When you select the code base, it gives you links so that you can work on it in your browser, go directly to the local code, or even open up a console or terminal with Drush pre-installed, change your PHP versions, and even open up phpMyAdmin to work on your database. So you become your own server admin to spin up sites locally that are not live on the internet. They're just for your local development environment. The tool also ties to cloud sites. If you're hosting with Acquia, you can add those as well. So I just spun up a new site this morning. It's a Drupal 8.2.3 site which is the most recent release, I believe, I guess. And pull this up over here. And so that's what this site is. When you want to work with features and functionality on a Drupal site, you go to Extend in the toolbar. And we can see categories of all the modules that are installed on the site. And a core install comes with about 40 core modules. And you can see as you scroll through that most of them are installed and enabled when you start a standard Drupal 8 site, but you'll find there are some cool tools and functionality that are not enabled right out of the box. So you can look and see what other functionality is available when you first install a site by going to the Extend page and looking at those that are not checked to see if they can offer functionality that you can use. One for certain is responsive image. I'm enabling that immediately on new site builds that allows you to have your image fields, the images that you collect on your site, displaying responsively based on breakpoints in your theme. So beneath that core category, you'll see that there's a new category in Drupal 8. It's called Core Experimental. And this is where all the new features live until they're included in core. So some of the things that we were talking about, almost it looks like everything that we were talking about is listed here under Core Experimental. There's the Big Pipe tool, and Migrate Drupal, Migrate UI, and inline forms. All of these were added with Drupal 8.1, and you can work with them by enabling them from your Extend page on your site. In 8.2 last month, we added content moderation, date time ranges, just allowing you to store end dates for any date entries, and place blocks and settings tray. So first I'd like to show you content moderation. So when these new features are added and they're in the core experimental group, you'll get a message that these are, still experimental, so use them at your own risk. I've found so far that all of them work, well, not all of them, but the majority of these new features, when they are promoted in a new minor release, are working really well. Content moderation, like I said, is the ability to add moderation states to set up a workflow for content that gets added to your site. So after you enable and install that module, you'll be able to configure the moderation states that are available with your Drupal 8 install. And by default, there's 3 included: draft, published, and archived. So when you have additional moderation states, it works in the same level of flexibility of everything with Drupal. You just name the additional states and how they're going to act. And so I'm just going to put legal review in there, and you can move it around to get the order that makes logical sense to your site users. Once you have your states all defined, you can develop your workflows. We call them moderation state transitions in Drupal 8. And so you go for each of these instances, what's going on with the content. It was a draft, so what options should the content editor have once they've entered their draft? And we can keep it as a draft, or we can publish it based on this workflow in the way that it's designed here. Then from published to what happens once it's published. Can we go back to draft? Yes, we can save as published, or we can save as archived. So these are all settings, and the interface is very familiar. If you've worked in the Drupal 8 interface, you have the 4-headed arrows. You can drag and drop. You can click to edit and really set up a custom content workflow that works exactly like your company needs to process. There's a question here, and I'll try and answer it now. It says, do we need to worry about experimental or dev modules breaking or not being compatible to other modules when they get updates? And no, the core team is incorporating these as part of core, although they're called core experimental. The experimental part is that they are not necessarily considered ready for showtime. You know, there may be more additions or changes that they're going to make to them. So they are past beta, they've been tested, and they're included and will be part of the whole update scheme. But they're experimental because they potentially need a little bit more work before they'll be accepted into core. It says, to what extent does dev mean it might not be complete versus this might change heaps? Oh, yeah, I think my understanding and what I've seen so far since the 8.1 release is that we're not getting heaps of changes after an experimental module is included. I don't know, honestly, that they're, where I've seen these features added in 8.1 and working just fine, I don't know what the plan is to actually push them into the core group. I don't know. I don't have that information right now. I'm sure it's at drupal.org/core as part of the rollout plan. But I'm not seeing major changes from like 8.1 to 8.2 with these experimental releases. And then the rest of, yes?
From what I've seen with some of the experimental modules, it's a case of get it to work as fast as possible, and then what they're actually doing is they're rewriting the code to comply with Drupal's coding standards, so that they are, you know, written to the highest quality that they can, and they are as compatible as they should be. So it's more a case of rushing to get things fixed so that they work, and then they're kind of filling in the gaps afterwards. So, like you say, it's not really that they don't work, it's just that they need polishing before they can be declared finished.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't wait to see them declare stuff finished. But it seems like they are in great shape once they're included in core experimental. I haven't had major problems. The migrate stuff still needs some work, so that's true of that. But they will certainly be included with updates and shouldn't break anything. They're certainly vetted for that. Thanks, Daniel.
No problem.
Okay, so that shows how these moderation states, you know, the controls that you get over this new feature. You can go in and play with the site yourself, just to go to extend and enable moderation states. Then you'll be able to see once content is added to the site or when adding content, how the workflows and the states that you've set up actually get applied. Permissions can be added to workflows as well. So like a draft can be published or unpublished, or draft still and are published, so you can see those options there. I believe if I put in new content, if I just add something here and save it, the draft, to publish, then we'll be able to see additional states available. Save and publish. So then if we go in to edit a published piece of content, the options are keep published or unpublished. Maybe I might have gotten distracted when I was configuring it. But we can get, you know, add to, oh, you know what, it's a matter of changing the content type to work with the workflows. So you'll see when you have your workflows added and configured, and you go to your structure content types, there'll be a new tab up here, Manage Moderation. This is the key. It's an important note. And you can enable moderation per content type. So if it's just blog articles or news releases or something that require moderation, you don't have to have that mucking up the works on basic pages or anything else. And so you have that total control per content type with the content moderation tool. I encourage you guys, I'm just doing really brief introductions of these couple of features, but I encourage you guys to go in and play with them, spin up a site. If you don't have the local environment, try the Dev Desktop from Acquia. It's totally free and very easy to install. And play with these new features so that you understand what's available to you now. It's amazing the changes that are being made, and I think place blocks is going to make that really apparent. So place blocks was added last month with 8.2. And if any of you are familiar with Drupal 7 and the panels interfaces that are available, there is a panels interface called In-Place Editor that allows you to configure your page layout while looking at your page layout. It's really dramatically easier to manage those page layouts with the In-Place Editor. So similar to that, Drupal 8.2 introduced Place Block. And you can see when it's enabled, it just adds a feature up in the top right. And then you get a visual display, yay, of your regions on your page based on the live CSS so that you can click to add blocks right into the page and know where they're going to go. This is, let's see, let's do something that makes sense without me just getting all excited and clicking around. So, for example, I might add who's online to my right sidebar. So I just clicked on that. I don't even have to know that it's the right sidebar or sidebar second. I just click on the area where I want the new block to appear, and then I'm introduced to the Place Block interface so that I can choose and configure the block. And it takes us to the screen right now. I'm assuming that's going to be a little friendlier. There's no reason to go back in there at this point, but we get our block placed where we want it on the page without having to understand the textual interface that we've had forever for structure blocks and having to know what primary menu means or featured top means. Now, with the Place Blocks tool, we can see what we're doing, which is really exciting. So that's one other addition from last month. The third one that I want to show you is the settings tray. And let's get down here. Settings tray is the start of these outside-in ideas where we're making it easier to configure your site while looking at your site without having to go to this external interface, the administrative interface. So I just enabled settings tray. We'll see if we can see how that's working so far. So from the home page with settings tray enabled, you'll see a new button up in the top left corner that says Edit. And when you click on that and choose to make changes, come on, nope. Let's see, I think it's the Quick Edit option. We get this sidebar that allows us to do editing while looking at the interface or looking at the home, the front of our site, so that we're really able to edit that user interface. So those are three things I really encourage you guys to take a look at. In addition to those, remember, let me see if I have this up here still, that in 8.1, you can, if you haven't played with them yet, you can look at the other experimental modules that were introduced back in April: Big Pipe, Migrate Tools, and Inline Form Errors. And coming up next in April, the release of 8.3, we expect to see the big Media Edition, which is going to make media management friendlier than what we have in Drupal currently. And they're going to continue to improve that settings tray quick edit tools. In January, if you remember the schedule, in January 30th is the week that they're targeting to put out the 8.3 beta. And so you should, if you want to play around with the new media tools, if you're really excited about that, you should get a really good peek at it starting, in January, February. So I encourage you to stay on track with these changes. They are fundamentally changing what Drupal 8 does, and it's just getting better and better all the time. Really exciting things, but if you haven't looked at any of these new experimental modules since the release a year ago, you're missing out. So keep on top of that. Like I said, I encourage you to just Google, like 8.2 new features, and you'll find lots of community members out there sharing helpful information and demos to help you figure out how to use the new features. Certainly, the documentation at Drupal.org is extremely valuable too. There's a question here asking if we'd recommend using experimental core modules in production. Yes, I've seen experimental core modules being used in production since last April, and with a development team who can manage the tools and develop them correctly for the client, absolutely. They're in core, and they are strong feature additions to what you're able to offer as a Drupal 8 web developer.
We have another question.
Okay. So Lindsay is asking, on major versions, could or should the use of semantic versioning mean that we can get to a point where a major version move from 8 to 9 won't require a migration? Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? I know that there's a lot of discussion about this, but the reason we go, just talking from a semantic versioning standpoint, the reason we go from one major version to another is because we're breaking the API. And so I don't know that we're going to see backwards compatibility at major versions. The reason we want to break the API is because we want to do new cool stuff. And to innovate, that sometimes requires abandoning backwards compatibility. So I don't know what the answer will be, but right now, it definitely, the community is talking about making migration more friendly from version to version.
We actually did a blog on this,
Cool.
on whether Drupal 8 would actually have a Drupal 9. Now it's got minor version upgrades. The general consensus was that when Symfony and the other components that Drupal now rely on have major version releases and drop their backwards compatibility, that Drupal 9 would have to be released. Yeah, that's the responded article that was written.
Yeah, yeah, I remember reading yours. Yeah, really, we are thinking about new things now with being able to introduce new features to a major release. So, so this is a great article here. If you guys, you can just Google, will there be a Drupal 9, or Gabor, will there be a Drupal 9? You'll find this article with a really clean explanation. Okay. So we did the demo. So I encourage you guys, again, go to, if you don't have a local environment that allows you to test or set up sandbox sites, use the one from Acquia. It's free and it works great, and it allows you to quickly add sites, the entire code base for sites and distributions, or add multi-sites to an existing code base. You can import code bases and databases to pull a copy of your current site down to a local dev environment, and try out these features, see how they work, and get them integrated into your Drupal 8 developments. They are much needed, and we'll continue to see much needed improvements as Drupal 8 continues.
We have another question.
Okay.
What percentage of the sites are you building in Drupal 8? For me, it's 100%.
Yeah, so Permit Source is developing. We do continuous integration, and we are oftentimes rescuing existing sites. So we certainly have a huge percentage of Drupal 7 clients that we're working with. New sites, though, are definitely being built in Drupal 8. Next week, on the week of the 28th, after Thanksgiving here in the U.S., I'm doing a 2-week training with a large insurance company in New York that is building a new site in 7. So those decisions are still being made on a per-case basis, though at this point I would always suggest to the clients to start with 8. 8 is stable, ready, and full of features and continually getting better.
Yeah, it entirely comes down to which modules you actually need. If you actually need specific modules and you're not prepared to build your own modules, then there are some minor instances where you might want to use Drupal 7. But as far as I'm concerned, you should use Drupal 8.
Yeah, Acquia and other big contributors to the Drupal community have actually been paying consultants to bring through some of the key modules from 7 that are needed in 8. So ones like calendar and others that aren't quite ready for show. I have a lot of people working on them and a lot of resources behind them. So we're seeing that improve all the time.
Do you know if there's any plans to bring calendar into Drupal core?
Yes. Into core. Good question. I think that they've had quite a bit of difficulty getting it to work with the 8 API. If you guys that are on are not familiar with calendar, it is a contributed module. You can find more information about it at drupal.org/project/calendar. And it was originally introduced in Drupal 7. It's basically an extension of views. It's really just a set of very, very nice looking calendar view displays that allow you to query and display date-based information, so that it looks great and works with your CSS really, really friendly. And so it became the primary way that everyone did calendar. As you can see, it was downloaded over 1 million times, and it's currently on 126,000 sites that are doing updates on a regular basis in Drupal. If you look at the statistics right now, over 100,000 of those sites are on Drupal 7, but 1,600 Drupal 8 sites are working with calendar and trying to make it work. That in the Drupal pond, that's a really big number. Like sometimes I'm happy if a couple hundred people are using them on their live sites. So it is being used. There is a lot of work going into getting it converted, though, and some issues still open. So they have not pushed it to recommended release for Drupal 8. And I think because of that, they just I haven't heard any conversation about it being part of core. I think first we just have to get it working with 8. But I would install it on almost every Drupal 7 site I built, so it certainly fits the criteria. Here's what a display looks like in calendar. It's just a available pre-formatted views display. You just query the date-based information, and it puts it in month, week, agenda, and yearly calendar formats for you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Just give me a second to... All right, well, if no one's got any questions, thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Margaret, for presenting at Drupal 8 Day.
Thank you.
All the sessions will be available later, so if you know someone you think might be interested, you can send them the link once we send it to you, and have a good day.
All right, take care, guys. Enjoy the day.